Get ready to embark on a journey through the captivating and ever-surprising universe of Mostly Facts. From the most thought-provoking discussions to heartwarming stories, side-splitting memes, and everything else that catches our eye. Don't miss out on a single moment of excitement. Make sure to smash that subscribe button and activate the notification bell. That way, you'll always be in the loop for the goldmine of content we've got lined up for you. Get ready to laugh, ponder, and explore the endless possibilities that the front page of the internet has to offer. Story 1. My current tenant just moved out. I had a beautiful home 3 years ago. 3-bedroom, fully solar, updated everything, nice bamboo floors. Enter my tenant. Red flags were not immediate. She had a great history with prior residences. A couple of exceptions were made. She wanted to pay $100 less than I had listed, asking if she could plant things in the garden, etc. Fast forward 6 months or so. Rent starts being late. Not only late, but she would not let me know until the day rent was due that she needed to pay 3 or 4 days later. When I could come by to collect the rent, she would tell me things were broken. Disposals, sink clogged, etc., which is all fine. But she would tell me it's been broken for 3 weeks and just now decided to tell me. We talk and text frequently about rent and other things, yet she could never inform me when stuff was broken until I dropped by. This all came to a head when she got rats in the house. I go over to collect rent after 2 months not being there, and holy hell. A fan globe was broken and the glass was all over the kitchen. For multiple days, they told me she had a 4-year-old in the house, too. The bathroom has roaches all in it, trash along the side of the house spilling out of cans, holes in the drywall, small but there, blinds, nice wooden ones, strings broken, and the house smells awful, like rat pee. She tells me there have been rats there for a few weeks. Well, I wonder if it has anything to do with all the trash outside and open food dishes in the sink that reek. I never in my life thought I would have to tell a grown woman with kids that, yes, you need to put garbage in the garbage can. No, you cannot leave food out until it rots, otherwise you get these lovely pests. Anyway, even though it's in her lease to deal with rodent/pest control issues, I do it myself. I hired a company under contract to handle the whole thing for a 1-year guarantee for like $1,000. All she has to do is call the number I give her whenever she sees or hears a rat or anything. Well, guess what she does not do? She would occasionally text me saying she saw a rat. I called pest control to come take care of it. Then nothing. This went on for 6 months. All the while, rats chewed through my stove wires, now not under warranty since they don't cover pest issues, clogged the dishwasher, wrecked my cabinets, etc. They just moved out last week. Holes in the doors now. Looks like they tried to crowbar the interior doors open for some reason. Split jams, garbage left all over the yard, front and back. My floors have this inexplicable grease all over and sticky things. Her child drew in crayon all over the doors. It's a mess. If you ever rent a place you care about, first, stop caring about it, and second, be choosy and take a few months unrented to get someone you are sure about. And I know this is probably going to be a controversial topic to cover because there are a lot of issues of rent skyrocketing, but this one I can feel for the landlord. This person was just not communicative. If she has glowing reviews from the past, there must be something just snapped in this person if it got taken out on this house. Sounded nice. Story 2. Great deities. I don't know where to begin. Cat ladies. 25 to 40 cats in an apartment with hardwood floors. Probably $80,000 worth of damage. Guy who decided to go full Picasso on a recently completed renovated apartment complex, including getting paint on the newly polished and gorgeous oak hardwood floors. I'm really dreading telling my bosses about this one. Lying shrew of a woman and her mother. Got her back, though. Full story in Malicious Compliance. Young couple live in squalor, keep cats inside a shut bedroom door, have a kid, then get power and heat shut off on them in November. Sad, really. Insane parking lady. Incredibly racist, hateful, gossipy, refuses to listen, always talks trash behind your back. I really can't wait to get rid of her. Grandma rents an apartment, lets her grandkid and her boyfriend move in. Keep the place nice. Then they break up, shut the power off themselves, and turn the keys over to some squatter who is tossing bottles of bleach outside that smell like gasoline. Mr. Macho thinks it was cool to karate chop and roundhouse kick every door in the apartment. Roadhouse. Curse you, Mr. Macho. Ms. Disgustings. Horribly gross people who don't clean and then wonder why they have mushrooms in the living room. Teenage kid of a Ms. Disgusting that goes around peeing in everyone's windows at another complex. Turkey lady. She buys a frozen turkey, then puts it in the fridge and promptly leaves it. For months. We all thought she was unalive because of the smell. She had barricaded her door, so it took us tearing down a fire door to get in. She was there, just didn't want to answer the door. So many college kids think that just because they're living on their own, they can do junk and get away with it. I've tossed out so many college kids, and it's always something kind of fun to do, because their parents are almost always co-signers. Parents, make your kids live in the dorms. I could go on for days. Who's the worst? I don't even know anymore. This person sounds like a property manager rather than a landlord, and must be some apartment complex. Either that or just a group of houses if they've got so many stories. How long of a time frame do you think all these stories originated? I mean, if it was in the span of 2 or 3 years, I'd feel for this person. Story 3. The Dog Ladies. Around 1993, friends of my father's bought a neighboring farm which came with a beautifully maintained classic country-style 3-bedroom house. Having taken out a massive bank loan to buy the new farm, they decided to rent out the house to help with payments. A couple showed up, wanting to live their dream of country life with their 2 German Shepherd dogs. They were charming ladies, and it sounded like a great match. Fast forward 2 years. They are almost 6 months delinquent on rent. The farmers are getting desperate. The ladies said if the landlords came on their property, they would have them arrested. There is clearly way more than 2 dogs here. The ladies are not even living inside the house. Only dogs are in the house. Humans are living in a shabby old camper van now parked out front. Nothing has been maintained. The house is clearly falling apart. The lawn is just weeds. The stench can be detected well before you get near the house. This has to end. One blessed day, it did end. The ladies got up and moved their camper van, and they were gone. But the dogs were still there. First call, SPCA. Now, this predates the internet carrying stories about massive animal hordes, but this would have been a major headline at the time. Over 60 dogs were seized from inside the house. 60! Plus, there were several decaying, unalive dogs found as well. The dogs had chewed and eaten away all the original woodwork, walls, a lot of their flooring, anything they could, even each other. The urine and feces had caused everything to rot through. Not 1 square inch of the home was salvageable. It was heartbreaking when the demolition came. The original family had worked so hard to meticulously maintain this gorgeous country home, and it was all plowed under only 2 years later. It was a total loss. I was too young to know what happened with insurance companies, but I do know they did not rebuild. Those poor dogs. And I feel sorry for the owners, too, obviously. This one is sad. Just two people taking advantage. It seems unbelievable that they were 6 months behind, yet they could threaten that they could have these people arrested if the landlords came on their property. What caused them to collect over 60 dogs and then live out back? I know we love our animals, but that's just seems too much. It's a shame they couldn't get any part of it fixed and continue with the rent. I wonder how much this set them back and if they were able to keep the whole farm. Story 4. Stephen. He and his girlfriend moved in. They led us to believe he was employed full-time and she was a student. Soon after, we were dealing with him cooking, eating, using common areas at like 2 to 4 a.m. in the morning constantly. Strong smells like car battery in the early a.m. Probably tweaking. His attempts at cleaning consisted of trying to mop the walls and surfaces instead of wiping them down, or just using the mop on the floor. Cringes. Kept a puppy in the house/room at times when he thought no one was around, which was definitely a no-no. Late with rent in his second month, became hostile with all other housemates with almost any interaction, or when asked to clean up his messes. Tried to pick fights with housemates to bait them to hit him or overreact. Luckily, we didn't. Dude was a psycho. Ended up giving him his 30 days notice before he had been here his second month. All the while, his poor girlfriend, who we all thought was in school, was actually pregnant with his kid, and that's why she was always home, and they had been running from/avoiding her family. She was a nice girl, but you could tell she had no control in the relationship. Apparently, it also came to light that maybe their relationship started when she was like 14 or 15, and he was probably 20 at the time. Grooming her, it seemed. He threatened us with all kinds of legal action. Actually did have to get a lawyer and make sure we were in the clear. Worst 3 months with a tenant/housemate. We actually threw a party when they left. I can only imagine that poor girl's life. Or the kids. Only have bad wishes for Steven, since he was such a scumbag douche canoe. Douche canoe is actually such an amazing insult. Story 1. I am successful, as in I have a job that sounds great and I make good money, but honestly, I've been pretty miserable. I don't like my industry or the people or the work. Every time I fly back home to visit, I'm the successful guy visiting his old hometown, which is awkward in many ways. If you ever wanted to know who your real friends are, move far away, in my case to another country, and it's really illuminating who keeps in touch, who makes a point to see you when you're in town, and who doesn't. Anyways, this guy that I barely knew always made a point to hang out and catch up when I was in town. He was genuinely interested in how I was and what was happening in my personal life. I barely knew the dude, but he always took interest in the important pieces. He wasn't doing so well himself. My hometown was having a bit of an economic downturn and he was laid off. He told me the story of how HR and security laid him off and wanted to walk him out, and he refused, saying he wouldn't make a scene, but he wanted to say goodbye to his coworkers, hold his head high, and leave with dignity. He was then unemployed for a long period, but he had a smile on his face and said, "No worries, dude. I'll keep trying. I'll find something." He was thankful for his friends, his family, his fiancée, all of his good fortune, in a position where most people would feel awful sorry for themselves. And while I'm sitting there having a beer with him, I realized that although I probably made literally 10 times what he made before being laid off, and on paper I was probably really successful compared to him, I would have traded everything to be him in that moment. At that moment, I was deeply envious of him and his life. Ever since then, I've tried to make it a part of my life philosophy that when I'm stressed out, I think, what would he do? And it inevitably leads me towards something that makes me happier. This hasn't kept me on the previous path of always pursuing career success, but it's made me happier and happier. Not only that, it's made me a nicer and more tolerant person. I still honestly barely know the guy, but I think about him as a role model at least once a week. After writing this up, I promise I'll tell him the next time I see him. Please make an effort to tell him. This may help him just as much as it did help you. I really agree with what he said about who your real friends are. I have visited home, and I know the people that keep in touch. Maybe there's some people that I've seen at a formal function, but I know the ones that make it a point to keep in touch with me. It is, if you have to leave town, you'll know who your friends are. Story 2. In high school, I was pretty quiet, and of the few friends I had, they were great friends. While my senior year, I'm not in the same lunch period as any of my friends, so most of the time I'm sitting alone, slowly watching the empty chairs at my table be dragged away to another table that needed them. Well, one of my friends always studied during lunch on block day with a teacher, one of the only days that I had the same period as a friend. Sometimes he would skip his study session to sit by me, and near the end of the year, during one such instance, he said to me real seriously, "A lot of people at this school just don't see you. And I understand how you feel, but I want you to know that I see you." And that has stuck with me since, and I can't get out of my head how nice that was of him, but also how it put everything in perspective to me. In high school, I was pretty quiet, and of the few friends I had, they were great friends. Well, wait a minute. It's the same paragraph over again. So yeah, put that in perspective to me. It's great to have someone just look at you and let you know that they see you. There are times where the stuff that I work on my own, it just feels like I'm doing it for me, even though I'm trying to reach out to an audience. It's great to have those people that really reach out and say, I see what you're doing. It's not the typical thing, but I like what you're doing. Maybe if they don't like what you're doing, but it seems to make you happy. Story 3. I have 2 sisters. One that I consider to be my soul twin, the smartest woman I know. The other one, whom I love just as much, is different. We just don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, and we're very different people, so we don't connect on a deeper level. This isn't a snag on her. I do love her. She just drives me bonkers a great deal of the time. When my divorce was finalized, I was crushed. Even with a year of separation that had been relatively calm, I still felt war-torn. During the separation, I had moved in with my more detached sister, who had also gotten divorced the previous year. She wasn't someone I would confide in very often about my feelings on my marriage, because she was still very raw from her own. On this day, though, I couldn't hold it in, and I couldn't hide it. When I got home from work, she sat with me in my room on my bed and just stayed quiet, not like her, until I blurted out everything I was feeling through sobs that racked my entire body. I honestly don't even know how she could understand anything I was saying, but she just held my hand and continued to stay silent. When I was all done, I looked at her and said, "What am I supposed to do now?" She squeezed my hand and said, "You can't finish your book if you keep rereading this chapter." It is to this day one of the most meaningful things anyone has ever said to me. That is an amazing addition to that analogy. We sometimes seem to be stuck on memory lane when we are going through life. And I just believe that even though some things go up and down, some things may come back, but everything mixes at different levels and frequencies. There is no new normal. There's really only the now normal. That's a great way to put it, the way she said it, though. Story 4. Finally, I hear Lewis, someone I had already associated myself with, say my name. He said it confidently, proudly. and with the utmost sincerity. It was just a simple, "Oh, I feel like Andy, for sure." So as you'd expect, my ears are perked up, and I'm just praying that the coin lands on heads so I can hear what the question was. But that's when the paranoia set in. What if it's a bad question? What if I don't want to know what the question was? But it's too late. It's flipped, and after what felt like a lifetime in suspension, it lands on heads, and Lewis repeats the question out loud. "Who here do you think will be the happiest and most successful?" It sounds stupid, but it was honestly something I really needed to hear at the time, as I was dealing with a lot of insecurities and just general emotional fatigue. Since then, though, I've always used it as a motivator and told myself, do it for Lewis and do it for yourself. To this day, any amount of success I've gotten, I've credited to that moment because it really did help give me confidence. I've won a few awards for my writing, and it's opened up so many great doors for me and my future, and it's all thanks to Lewis and that stupid game, and I don't think he or anyone there has any idea how much it meant to me. That sounds like a game that's more trouble than it's worth. Story 5. I have problems with social anxiety, and for a very long time it was really hard for me to do things like go shopping, talk to waiters, or even ask other people for help. While I was growing up, my dad never understood why I avoided those things and had so much trouble with them. One day, he and I got a little drunk at his house while playing pool, and I was apparently far less tight-lipped than usual, and I told him everything about how it made me feel, what caused it, how I hated that it controlled so much of my life and stopped me from doing so much that I wanted to do. One day, he offers to take me on the road with him as a passenger while he's doing his truck driving job. It's a 5-day trip from Ohio to Houston and back. As we're driving, he tells me, "Son, I'm not going to be around forever, but I'll help you how I can. The easiest place to start is to walk into every place like you own it. If you can fake it, you can make it. That's all I do." I never considered that my dad, who had been a practical mountain in my eyes, had even the slightest insecurities. When he told me that, I was awestruck. Since then, I've been getting a little better over time, and when it's really bad, I just remind myself what he said. Your dad sounds like a great guy. Story 6. I recently told my dad this story and he laughed hard, saying something like, "I could have saved your mother and I would have a heck of a lot of trouble if I had just followed the rules. When I was a kid, I once told my dad that he couldn't U-turn because of the double yellow lines in the road. He did it anyway, and he said something along the lines of, 'Son, someday you'll learn they're just lines of paint.' He was just talking about the road, but that quote shifted my perspective on a lot of things like ethics and gray areas. He showed me that good people can still question the rules, and breaking a law doesn't necessarily make you a bad person. It opened a whole new way of thinking about authority and compliance. Obviously, my 8-year-old brain wasn't figuring this stuff out in such eloquent internal monologue, but I was thinking critically. When I approach life with a healthy dose of skepticism, this quote often involuntarily comes to mind. It has such breadth and depth of meaning for me as I've applied it to so many situations, not just situations involving authority. He didn't remember saying it, but it really stuck with me. This one spoke to me. I tend to get really caught up in what the rules say. Your dad is accidentally very wise. If there are those of you listening that play D&D, you're all very familiar with the alignment chart, and on one side you've got lawful and chaotic. Lawful is how willing you are to adhere to the rules, and chaotic is not that. And I think that's what this is describing here. Some people just look at and it's separate from good and evil. You may be a good person, but you might not find the rules all that helpful for you. Story 7. A friend of mine in high school said something I will never forget. I was sitting in civics class fooling around sketching and stuff. I always have random ideas about stuff and write and draw random stuff. Never very good stuff in terms of art, though. Anyway, I had an idea about a heart monitor people could wear while sleeping, and it would go off if someone had a problem. She asked what I was doing, and I showed/explained it. She then said, "You're going to change the world one day." I wish I'd managed that, but I like to think I still have time to help change the world. She perished in her sleep of a diagnosed brain aneurysm about 6 years after high school. Still makes me really sad thinking about it to this day. She was a really happy, friendly, amazing person. We weren't close after high school, but her passing definitely affected me. Really sucked to see the world lose such an awesome person. Story 1. I know it's popular to hate gluten-free people right now, but I legitimately can't consume gluten because I have celiac disease. There's definitely a threshold for my allergy, but I'm not totally sure where the line is. I'm usually fine eating, for example, fries from the same fryer as onion rings, but if I eat an actual piece of bread, I'll get headaches, stomach aches, and probably throw it up. Anyways, the summer after high school, my friend got me a job at this awful Mexican restaurant she worked at. Everything came in bagged/frozen except the green chili, which we made in-house. Every time I start at a new restaurant, I make it a habit to learn what allergens are in what dishes, because I take that stuff seriously, and I also want to know what I can eat safely. This restaurant had all ingredients and allergens for everything listed in a binder, so I read through it and saw that the chili was actually gluten-free. Every day at work, I would get a plate of rolled chicken enchiladas on corn tortillas smothered in green chili. But after a few days, I started feeling sick. It started with headaches, then stomach cramps so bad I had trouble focusing at work. I messed up orders, had to constantly take breaks, and generally was miserable. In the middle of the night or in the mornings, I would wake up throwing up. But this being the restaurant industry, no one would let me call in sick. Eventually, I threw up in the bathroom while at work, and they sent me home. I was out for 2 days, but I couldn't figure out what had made me sick because I'm careful about my groceries and everything I had eaten at the restaurant was supposed to be gluten-free. When I got back, I was talking to my friend, who, by the way, had not checked up on me at all, about how confused I was with the whole thing, and she started absolutely laughing. Turns out she didn't believe I had a real allergy and thought it would be funny to prove I was faking it. So she got the cooks to add flour to the chili. Obviously, I was freaking ticked. She had essentially poisoned me, and who knows how many other people, by adding the flour. What is wrong with people? Celiac is an autoimmune disease, so it can take months to repair the damage and for your immune system to settle down after exposure. I'm sorry that happened to you. What a horrible person. I know it's like trying to prove that someone's dog isn't really a service dog and they just got themselves a jacket with service dog so they could be in the building while they work. But this is a lot worse. I mean, these people that are playing a joke to prove that they don't have a disease, if they're wrong, someone is going away permanently. And I don't see that people think that through. Story 2. I have a strange allergy that most people don't believe. I'm allergic to mint and menthol. Anything that's supposed to give you that nice cooling sensation just feels like burning fire and makes me swell and itch. No anaphylaxis, but just really uncomfortable. It's in toothpaste, face washes, deodorant, candy, hair products. I had a friend, and as young teens do, she decided to wash my hair and give me a sleepover spa day sort of thing. We washed each other's hair in the kitchen sink, cucumber on the eyes, candles going. She had heard me many times say I was allergic, so I decided to trust her. But without telling me, she decides to use her mom's fancy peppermint shampoo, thinking it wouldn't be bad. Suddenly, a relaxing spa day turned into a Michael Jackson Pepsi commercial. Next thing I know, I'm writhing around trying not to tear my scalp off while I'm screaming at her, "What did you do? What's in this?" She kept telling me that it was good stuff and her mom uses it all the time. Mom never had a problem. The remainder of spa day was spent with my head running under cold water until the Benadryl kicked in. I also get an adverse reaction to Benadryl, so instead of sleepy, I get hyped. The rest of that sleepover was me sitting like a 16-year-old on Peruvian marching powder, trying to watch a movie by pacing back and forth behind the couch, patting my thighs to the beat of everything that was happening in the movie. Not a fun sleepover. Maybe this person thought peppermint wasn't mint or menthol? Other than that, what were they thinking? Oh, it's good stuff. My mom uses it all the time. Does your mom have a mint allergy? Story 3. My mother does this constantly. I stopped accepting food from her a long time ago because she will either purposely add my allergens into the food or use utensils covered in my allergens to stir otherwise uncontaminated food. She just refuses to believe that her kid could have a life-threatening allergy. I don't have the kind of food allergies that just make your stomach upset. If I come in contact with any fermented or mold-based food, I will literally have my throat close and my nail beds turn blue as I stop breathing. I've been hospitalized for this. Everyone who knows me knows this and tries to avoid bringing me into contact with problem foods. Except my mother. The worst example of this behavior happened when I was moving. My mom comes over to help me move and brings over what looks like French fries covered in ranch. She picks one up and brings it to my face like she's going to feed it to me. Mind you, I'm 22 years old at this point in my life. The smell alone clued me in that this was blue cheese, so I jerked back and said, "No, I'm not eating that," and removed myself from the situation because I knew I would start screaming at her if I didn't. But my friend, let's call him Dave, is flabbergasted. Everyone knows not to bring this around me, and my mom just strolls in and tries to feed it to me? For a visual, Dave is a large 6'6" black man. He crosses his arms, looks at my mom and goes, "Dog, you know that stuff will kill her." She stammers out some, "Oh, I forgot," and makes a hasty retreat to pretend to be helping someone else. Ever since that incident, she stopped trying to put this in front of him or anyone else who will call her out on it, and has moved on to accidentally cross-contaminating things. But she still brings up how mean Dave is for cursing at her when she just wanted to bring some food over. Your mom is flat out abusive, like, holy hell. I mean, I had been snoring for a long time as a kid, and my parents just thought I was a growing boy, and that's the way my body was just adjusting. Turns out later, after I had a job with health insurance, I was diagnosed with severe sleep apnea and had to wear a CPAP for a while. So I can understand the frustration with not having a parent believe you. Story 4. I'm allergic to limes. Other citrus doesn't bother me. Just limes. I'm a bartender, and so things suck sometimes, but I'm usually okay. My allergy developed after I had started bartending. At first, it was just a mild skin allergy, but I could still drink it. Then, it started getting worse. I'm at a point now where even a small sip of a drink with lime will set off a reaction in my throat. It burns very badly. And the hives. My goodness, the hives. I usually have to remind friends and family when they're trying to make me drinks because it's not a common allergy, and I'm almost always okay. I can't have my favorite drinks anymore when I go out because most places don't have the ability to make me a margarita with lemon instead of lime. Most pre-mix their juices or whatever. Maybe they're lazy and just don't want to do it. Fine, it's not a big deal, but I always ask anyways on the off chance that they can. It's not really just that, though. I can't trust people at other restaurants and bars anymore. This shrew told me she could make a margarita with only lemon. I was super stressed. I can't have sour mix or anything. It must be only lemon. She said it was no problem because they had fresh squeezed juices and it was easy to accommodate me. She used a sweet and sour mix, and when I started drinking it, I took a big sip and could tell immediately when it hit my tongue. She had a smug look on her face until I started reacting right there. My boyfriend raised absolute hell while I was trying to get the reaction to stop. I should have pressed charges, but I didn't because I was younger then and felt like her being fired was enough. I still wonder every so often whether or not she learned her absolute lesson. Story 5. I have alpha-gal allergy. Got bit by a tick at Fort Dix, New Jersey in 2014. Made homemade beef tacos the night prior to having my first hives anaphylaxis. At this time, docs didn't know what I was allergic to, so they did a blood test on everything. Came back negative on red meat skin test, but highly positive for alpha-gal allergy. My Asian mom doesn't believe in allergies, so she doesn't believe me. I was already having a hard time with it, knowing I would never be able to eat a nice medium rare steak ever again. Mom makes stew with pork in it, but surprisingly, I didn't have a reaction. A reaction for me can be between 4 to 12 hours after ingestion. Thought I was cleared and I wasn't allergic anymore. Nope, I did not consult the doctor because this allergy is still in its researching and testing phase. Turns out 4 to 6 months later, after returning to my normal diet with red meat, I have the quickest and most dangerous reaction. My body went straight to anaphylaxis in 4 hours. Since then, I've carefully monitored and stayed away from red meats, but will occasionally take a small, teeny piece of pork because I like the taste. I haven't had a reaction from the small pieces, so I've continued to eat small pieces from time to time to test my body's limitations. Yes, I know I'm risking my life, but I've got a couple expired $600 EpiPens, and with my luck, no reaction. Yet. I know this isn't that, but saying you have alpha-gal allergy sounds like you're allergic to strong, independent women. Story 6. Not exactly tricked, but I had a coworker with a severe dairy allergy. Had to carry an EpiPen and everything. She was leaving the company, so on her last day, I brought in a huge batch of vegan brownies. Typically, when I make that recipe, I use soy milk, but I had another coworker, B, who had a soy allergy, so I used almond milk instead. Coworker B took one of the brownies after confirming with me they were totally soy-free, but came back about 10 minutes later asking if I was sure there was no soy in the brownies. She was clearly having a reaction, so I panicked and started listing off all the ingredients I used in the recipe. When I mentioned the almond milk, she said, "Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm allergic to almonds too." She ended up going home for the rest of the day, and I'm still baffled that someone with allergies that severe wouldn't verify the food she was eating was free of all her allergens. I'd just like to say it's incredibly sweet of you to make special brownies that cater to not one but 2 of your coworkers' restrictions. Thank you for being so kind. Most of these stories have been on the person playing the gag to try and prove they weren't on allergies, but this one was on the other person. You gotta ask everything. You can't just assume, especially, has this person never heard of almond milk before? There's so many milk substitutes on the market nowadays. It's amazing to think that you're actually allergic to the alternative. Story 1. Here goes. It's quite a long one. I'm from Belgium and have traveled a lot with my parents when I was younger. When I was still together with my ex-girlfriend, we traveled a lot as well, but neither of us had been to the USA. So we told this to a befriended couple, and a few beers later, we started planning a trip to go on together, because another mutual friend was studying in Philadelphia for a year, and we might as well go visit him. First, we went to New York and Philly for a few days, then took a plane to LA, rented a car, and took a road trip through Cali, Nevada, and Utah. During this road trip, we'd often laugh about some of the dumb things we'd heard or seen people do in America. We had a bunch of jokes about people in smaller villages and all kinds of crazy stuff they might do. We had just been to Sequoia National Park, and we were looking for a place to spend the night and eat because it was getting late. Found some old farmhouse where we could stay in one of those fixed-up cabins and asked the old lady who rented it to us where we could go and eat something. Mind you, this little town was called Pinehurst and had an extremely low population. She pointed us to the Pinehurst Lodge, which was basically the only restaurant, bar, store in town for miles. Went there, ate an amazing meal, and decided to go grab some drinks afterwards and shoot some pool. As we were playing pool, this old giant approached us, wearing a jeans shirt that said George W. Bush, picture of an eagle. He had a bushy mustache, Looked very tough for his age, and we thought he was going to give us trouble about using the pool table and laughing too hard. He is, to this day, one of the kindest people I've ever met. He asked if we were having fun and if he could join us. He bought us moonshine, which we obviously thought was hilarious, and we bought him a few beers as well. Had a blast the entire evening. While we were playing and drinking, the phone behind the counter kept ringing, but none of us were paying any attention to it. By 11:30, all of a sudden, a woman comes barging in with a gun in her hand, looks at us, and stomps over. I felt myself getting nervous and ready to react if I had to. She stops behind our new friend, grabs an empty beer bottle, and smashes it on his head. We were all perplexed with what happened. She proceeded to shout insults at the man and started hitting him. He calmly tells her to relax, turns towards us, shook our hands, told us that if we ever came back to be sure to let him know so we could hang out again, and then went outside with the woman. As we stood there, still trying to understand what had just happened, the woman at the bar just shouts at us, "That's his wife. He's a bit of a social butterfly, and she had already called 10 times to ask when he'd come home." We thought it was pretty cool and all, so we told her, "Oh, okay, we're just going to leave as well then. It's getting quite late." "Oh no, my dearies, it's best you stay a little while longer. The shouting you hear outside is still them arguing. And I can tell she's quite ticked at you guys because she blames you that he hasn't come home yet. And I have to say, it wouldn't be the first time she shot at someone for keeping him too long at the bar, so best you stay a little bit until they leave." So we stayed about 30 more minutes, all the while they kept shouting outside. Then we heard a car start and see a white truck speed off. Within seconds, we see a second truck speed after the first one. This was in the mountains, with very narrow and bendy roads. Both cars are just leaving at an insane speed. We hear the bartender say, "She drives our children to school with the bus, you know." This would never happen at home. 100% would go back to Pinewood Lodge in a few years. Edit. It was Pinehurst. Check the link in the comments and can confirm that was the place. This sounds like something out of a comic strip. That's all the timing on it is just too perfect. I mean, also grateful that they found someone to socialize with. How were they to know that he was married and that he had a curfew? Someone like that, you don't expect to have a curfew. You expect him to give other people curfews. Story 2. This happened in either the late 90s or early aughts. So my granddad got jiggy with another woman when he was on holiday once with a lady from Kiribati. Anyway, it produced a child, my aunt. Several years ago, my family decided that we would go and visit her in Kiribati. For those that don't know, it's on the equator. To get there, we had to fly from Fiji on a tiny 50-seater twin prop plane with one toilet at the front. Now, being a kid with a lot of food allergies, I had eaten something that didn't quite sit right. Mild case of food poisoning, if you will. About half an hour into our flight, my stomach gives me that feeling you know you won't stop what's coming. So I got up and went to the toilet. Halfway up the aisle, all hell broke loose. I farted, which wasn't a fart. It was the beginnings of full-blown diarrhea. By the time I got into the toilet and locked the door, my undies were soaked. It was still flowing. I couldn't stop it. Now, I was a good kid, so I didn't want to block the toilet, so I threw my undies in the rubbish and unloaded into the toilet. However, the amount that came out, plus the amount of paper I had to use, ended up blocking the toilet anyway, and it stunk. Really badly. I would have been in there for a good 15 minutes. Meanwhile, the entire plane started stinking of poop. I finished up and cleaned up as best I could, but the toilet was done for. It was starting to overflow. I just slowly went back to my seat with the entire plane staring at me. Disclaimer. Back in the day, there was a small amount of water with chemicals to flush with, much more than there is today. A blocked opening means there's where for the poo to go. Couldn't quite read that one. And no vacuum to suck the poop down because it's blocked. The more you press the lever, the more chemicals, been saying water as it was faster to type, get pumped in. With the toilet blocked, there's nowhere for it to go except overflow. Now imagine the amount of paper I had to use to block an airplane toilet, and that's why it was blocked. I had to tell my dad what I had done, and he spoke to the flight attendants who had to try to clear the mess of a toilet with the water starting to splash onto the floor. It was horrible. We finally got to Kiribati, and the plane had to be grounded while they disinfected and cleaned the whole plane as it started to sweat as soon as the heat from outside came in. The plane was delayed for a good while. I only remember this as my dad brought it up on the other day in convo. He thought I put my undies in the toilet, which blocked it. I had to assure him it was all TP and poop. Too long didn't read? Pooped myself on a plane and made it get delayed. We didn't even get to the person they were supposed to visit. I thought there was going to be a story there. We didn't even get the whole story. Not just them getting delayed, getting to visit this person, but the whole story got delayed because of this poop. Very powerful load this man had. Story 3. I was an exchange student in Poland a few years ago. I was freshly 18 and had almost no experience with alcohol. In the third week of school, we had a dance, and I decided to attend. It was not at all like the school dances we have in the U.S. First off, it was held at a club downtown. Little odd, but okay. Second, it had a bar. I was in the senior class in high school, and we were all 18, so we could drink. I was not ready for that at all. Third, I had just started smoking the week before. My high school had a smoking gazebo, and probably a third of my class smoked. I started smoking to make friends. This turned into the perfect storm of me getting absolutely freaking scat-faced. After blacking out shortly, I was suddenly outside smoking, and my friends and I were walking to a nearby 24-hour liquor store. I walked in, visibly inebriated, and bought a mid-sized bottle of vodka. The cashier was hesitant, but when she heard I was American, basically just said, "Forget it, go ham." Probably another 2 hours and another blackout later, the police arrive. They start yelling at my class president for wandering in the road. For some reason, drunk me decides I should get involved, even though I barely speak Polish and am super absolutely wasted. I walked up to the cop and in the worst Polish I've ever spoken, tried to say, "Leave him alone." But what came out was leave, and then a pile of vomit all over his boots. Oh, hell. This is it, I thought. I'm going to get arrested and deported. The cop looked at me and said in English, "You an American?" "Yes, sir," I replied, knowing I was in deep poop. The cop looked me up and down, looked at the bottle of vodka in my hand, and said, "You drink bad vodka. Come with me." I was put into the back of the police car, and he started to drive away. My heart sank. 3 weeks into what was supposed to be the best year of my life, it was already over. But he stopped 2 blocks away at the 24-hour liquor store, brought me inside, and bought me a 100 milliliter bottle of Zubrowka vodka. You have to let me know if I said that right. Zubrowka vodka. He said, "This is good and cheap. Welcome to Poland. Now let me take you back to your friends." As we pulled back up to the club, he leaned back and said, "Watch this." He turned on the lights and siren, and 3 or 4 kids ran down the block. He was laughing uncontrollably. He unlocked the door, and as I climbed out, he shouted, "Be safe, friend." 20 minutes later, I blacked out again. And the next thing I remember was waking up on the kitchen floor of the house I was living in, feeling like absolute hell. My host mother had made coffee and said, "Damn, you had a night, huh?" And that was the craziest night I ever had. Sorry for formatting, I'm pretty bad at it. Oh, it's just so funny when that works out the way it, when it doesn't work out the way you expect it to, but it works out so much better. This was a good cop. This was a good someone. Not only did he not arrest him, but guided him to better liquor. That's so cool. Story 4. When I was about 10, my family moved from the city to this small, like a few hundred residents town in northern Australia. We started going to school, and after a few weeks, we made friends with the other kids. They kept telling us about this club in town called the Nature Rangers. The way they described it, it sounded like some off-brand Boy Scouts with camping and hiking and all that. They also said they gathered at their ranger hall on Fridays to have movie nights with popcorn and hot dogs. Me and my younger sister begged our parents to let us join, so on Friday night we got dropped off at the hall. So we line up to go into the hall, and all the kids are joking and laughing. They open the doors, and we all start walking in, and the whole mood shifts. All the kids immediately shut up. As I walked in, I looked up, and on the walls were all these signs. "Sinners must burn. The devil is coming for you. Christ is your only savior." Stuff like that. The one that stood out was this huge mural of Australia engulfed in flames, with only a northern town spared. It was an eye-opener for us city kids. What happened next got weirder. It was something you'd see in movies about fanaticals in the deep south of America. We sang these weird folk songs, listened to fire and brimstone sermons. We had to give our faith to the Lord Jesus. The one song that stuck out years later went, "He's under my feet, he's under my feet, Satan is under my feet." The song was accompanied with a dance we had to learn. Me and my sister were looking at each other like, when is this going to be over? Then after all of that, we were ushered outside. The boys and girls were separated. The girls were to stay at the hall, but the boys were off to go with this creepy-looking old guy who they called Brother Joseph. He was getting all the boys to get into his white van to take them for a drive. That's when I knew that enough was enough. I snuck out of the line and silently got my sister and said, "We are going." By this time, it was late at night, so we snuck off into the dark. Our home was on the other side of town, so we slowly made our way home, creeping from yard to yard. Every time we saw car lights, we hid in trees or bushes. When we got about half a kilometer from home, I told my sister to leg it, and we sprinted the whole way home, burst into our house, and proceeded to tell our parents the whole thing. They always say they had never seen us so scared. It's a story we laugh about all the time, but at the time it was dodgy as hell. We lived in that town for another 3 months, and the other kids never mentioned nature rangers to us ever again. Story 1. My grandfather was a kid during World War II. He was born in 1931. He lived in Rugenwald, which used to be a part of Germany. Today it's Poland, near the city of Stettin. His dad had to fight for the Nazis, even though they were not particularly fond of their ideas. My grandfather had to go to Hitler Youth, where they would make all sorts of week-long trips through forests, learn how to handle guns, etc. He wasn't able to visit school for some time due to Germany losing the war. My great-grandfather obviously fought the Russians on the Eastern Front, but he was captured on a mission in Russia and kept as a war prisoner. When he had a really bad lung infection, and it was becoming clearer that Germany would be losing the war, he was released from prison and was able to spend 3 more days with his family before he passed. Then it was my grandfather's turn to try and earn some money, as he was the only son they had, and his mom had to take care of his younger sister. When Russia took over the whole area, they gave the Germans in the area the chance to leave for Western Germany. They provided 1 train and said whoever could get on there was free to go. The rest would stay there. My grandfather made sure that his family got on the train, but he didn't have any space himself, So he rode the train by standing on the metal bar thing that connects two train wagons for part of the journey. Luckily, the train didn't run too fast. Once Hitler came to my grandfather's hometown earlier in the wartime, and he said everyone was so excited to see this man. People literally camped by the train tracks to await his train. Apparently, he came by train for some reason. There's plenty more. Since my granddad basically had to flee his hometown and had never returned, he asked me and my dad, his son, to take him there a couple years back, since he would love to see how it turned out. He was already over 80 years old. Of course, we were happy to go, and we spent 9 days there. Some of it was quite emotional for him, and he told me many stories of his childhood. It was really interesting to hear his point of view, as he was a child for the most part. As I understand it, Hitler had his entire command structure in a train in the early years of the war, and they'd move close to wherever they were invading next, so the lines of communication were shorter. It's really fascinating to see that part of it. We all hear about it and read about it, but it's great that this person got to experience firsthand how someone experienced that very historic event, especially someone as a child. That's got to be a very specific and very unique point of view. Story 2. I don't know the details very well, so I'll let more knowledgeable war historians fill in the blanks for me. My grandfather was a random farmhand in central France, about when the French government surrendered. A couple years later, he joined the resistance, not knowing how long the war was going to last. Turns out he joined at the end of 1943, so it was only a few months later that the U.S. Army ended up winning the French territories back. When the U.S. forces arrived near my grandpa's countryside, his Maquis resistance group essentially offered their services as scouts/reconnaissance, since they didn't have much firepower, but they were quite good at sneaking around. They ended up making their way through eastern France and into Germany, liberating various small towns on the way, although my understanding is that the Wehrmacht was essentially fleeing at this point. Enter the small town of Annweiler in Germany. My grandpa is making a reconnaissance round where he hears a patrol coming around and has to hide quickly. He knocked on a random door and asked in broken German to be hidden inside. I might get this wrong. Versteck mich? They accepted, and in that house, my grandpa met the daughter of the family, just 3 years younger than him. Her name was Anna. They kept in touch, and he came back with his hat in his hands a couple years later and asked for her hand. They settled in Lorraine, a region that historically got passed around between France and Prussia/Germany, and where a French-German couple would not be judged quite as harshly. 60 years of marriage, 6 children, and a gaggle of grandkids and great-grandkids later, they passed away a few months apart from each other. They're buried in the tiny graveyard of the church of the village where I grew up. This sounds something like straight out of a wartime romance film. It's amazing that in spite of all of this horror and war, that there was something, that this great family came out of it. That is incredible. Story 3. Posted this already in another thread some time ago. My German grandpa fled from what is now Poland. He's born in 1937. His dad owned a larger farm estate, and there were some of the wealthier farmers in the region. They owned a car, for instance, which was a luxury. When the worst came to worst in 1944 and 45, his dad was drafted in the Volkssturm, Nazi recruitment of children and elders. But because he was a stubborn farmer, he said curse the Nazis and hid out in a forest nearby. One day, the Red Army arrived, and my grandpa, who is still alive right now, recalls that they literally parked in front of the main house, knocked down the door, and yelled in broken German for them to pack their things in 10 minutes and leave, or they'll all be shot. So my grandpa, about 7 or 8, had to flee with barely anything. They marched for weeks through war-torn wastelands, burning villages, all while artillery and tanks were roaring in the distance and warplanes flew over their heads. He recalls playing with some gas masks they had found on their way, probably next to some burned-out vehicles. They rejoined the larger streams of refugees and made it to East Germany, where my grandpa's dad was re-educated into socialism and lived bitter and angry until his passing. My grandpa eventually fled East Germany in the 1950s with nothing but his rusty bike and the stars above his head to the west. It's something that's part of World War II I'm kind of not familiar with. I would have to look up what exactly this Volkssturm was. That sounds kind of desperate when they're specifically targeting the people that are not fit to fight in the war. Or just anything. Do any of you know what that's about? What happened with them? Let me know in the comments. Story 4. My grandfather, Polish, was only about 12 when Poland was invaded by Nazi Germany. He was from a poor, small farming village where most of his family lived and worked. At the end of the war, he moved to Dachau and signed up to be a guard at the Dachau concentration camp, under orders from the U.S. Army. The Dachau concentration camp after the war held all the Nazi SS and other war criminals who were awaiting trial. So I'm sure he experienced some inhumane things being done there, but he never spoke about it. I recently received my Polish passport, and in doing so had to dig up a lot of old photos and information about him. The only thing I could read in English was his enlisting documents at Dachau by the U.S. Army, accompanied by a photo of him in the uniform. It's a great photo. My grandmother, German, was from a wealthy family and lived in a town near the Czech border. Her uncle was a lawyer for one of the Communist Party members and was taken away and never seen again. After the war, all of their land, possession, and properties were given to the Czechs, and they were told they could only take with them what they could carry. My grandmother left for Munich to find work. Dachau is near Munich. My grandparents met, fell in love, and after a couple of years, got married and moved all the way to Australia with no money or possessions, something they were probably used to by now. Then they moved in with a family where my grandma did housework for keeps, and my grandfather went around collecting scrap metal to sell. He ended up building a very successful business from this that has provided for their children and grandchildren. I'm very proud of them. My grandfather passed away in 2014, and my grandmother passed away in March this year. They had a long and happy life. R.I.P. Jaja and Oma. Story 5. My great-grandfather never talked about the war until he had his stroke. We knew he had a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star, but we didn't know how he got them. He was just a private, and he'd had enough of the military when the war was over. After the stroke, he seemed to loosen up. He laughed about sighting rifles by shooting at chickens. He showed us pictures of him in front of the Eiffel Tower. Turns out he was in the occupation force. Ended up occupying an area near Berlin that became involved in the Battle of the Bulge. Apparently, while he was fighting, some sort of explosive blew off his buddy's leg, so Grandpa did what anyone else would do and threw his buddy over his shoulder to get him to the med tent. This included running across a field in the line of sight of a German machine gun nest. He was shot in the leg, and some more shrapnel ended up in his chest. Somehow, Grandpa and his buddy survived. We thought he was embellishing it, but the Bronze Star paperwork included a report that we found after he passed away. 2 higher-ups signed that the story was true, so I guess I have to believe it. He told us it wasn't that big of a deal and that he didn't deserve all those medals for what he did. What a bad-to-the-bone man. R.I.P. Gramps. Ended up occupying an area near Berlin that became involved in the Battle of the Bulge. That area is 700 to 800 kilometers from Berlin. Sounds like Gramps was bad to the bone nonetheless. Story 6. My grandmother was a Jew in a Nazi concentration camp. She was pretty much certain to perish because she didn't have a job and she wasn't cunning enough to survive on her own. It was rough. One day, some local farmers in Russia brought her to work for them during the day. So she would go to the farm to work during the day and come back at night. The farmers would feed her and clothe her. They also helped her sneak food into the camp. Often, I don't know how, she would sneak soups into the camp to give to her friends and family. The farmers were endless in their kindness and helped her survive until the Nazis were defeated and everyone was released. My grandmother was reunited with her family and lived a long life until she passed away last year. Without the farmers' kindness, I don't think I would be here today. Your grandma is a hero. She could have survived just fine without any risk of getting caught if she didn't sneak soup in for her mates, but she did anyway. Meddling when you don't need to is the essence of being a hero. Elon Einstein, 1764. First off, Elon Einstein, I don't know who the person is, but the name today is pretty funny. And secondly, even though this woman was portrayed as someone who didn't have enough wits or cunning about her to be important, she ended up being important by being brave enough to sneak in food to her friends inside the camp. I think that deserves something, definitely. This story definitely deserved to be told.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.